Jake had been on many missions in the past, but none had felt quite like this. The alien world he was visiting was like nothing he had ever seen. The planet, Arender, was a place of beauty and danger, where the skies shimmered with two suns and the trees seemed to glow under their light. The people of Arender, tall and graceful, were known for their intelligence and advanced technology. But they were also cautious, especially when it came to humans. Jake was an intergalactic diplomat, tasked with helping build peaceful relations between humans and alien species. Today, he was meeting someone very important, Princess Selena. The palace where Jake was to meet the princess was as grand as it was intimidating. Its walls were made of smooth, silver stone, reflecting the light from the suns above. Guards stood tall at every corner, their eyes sharp and watchful. As Jake was led into the grand hall, he couldn't help but feel out of place. This wasn't the first time he had stepped into an alien palace. But there was something different about this place. It felt more like a fortress than a home, and it made him wonder if the princess felt trapped within its walls. Jake was greeted by a tall, regal woman with dark violet skin and silver eyes. She wore a crown made of delicate crystals that caught the light with every movement. Selena, the princess, was known for her beauty, intelligence, and strength. But there was also an air of coldness about her. As he walked up to her, Jake took a deep breath and decided to try to break the ice. "Hey, sweetie," he said with a grin, giving her a playful wink. At that moment, Selena froze. Her violet eyes widened, and her cheeks turned a shade of purple so deep it almost matched the color of her skin. She blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. Jake stood there, awkwardly waiting for her response. He hadn't meant to offend her. He was just trying to make her feel more at ease. But he quickly realized that he might have overstepped. I didn't mean to offend you," Jake said, his voice faltering. "I was just trying to lighten the mood." To his surprise, Selena's eyes softened, and a small smile tugged at the corners of her lips. She took a deep breath, regaining her composure, and spoke. "Yes, darling," she replied in a tone that was calm but laced with a hint of amusement. Jake's eyes widened, and he couldn't help but laugh. He wasn't sure if it was her words or the way she said them, but something about the situation made him feel more at ease. The tension between them seemed to fade instantly. You're not mad?" Jake asked. Still unsure if he had crossed a line, Selena shook her head, her smile widening. "No, I'm not mad," she said softly, though her cheeks were still a little flushed. "I've just never heard anyone speak to me like that before." Jake laughed again, feeling more comfortable than he had expected. "Well, I'm sure it's a first for both of us," he said with a grin. Selena looked at him for a moment, her gaze softening. "I didn't expect you to be so relaxed," she admitted. "Most diplomats are so formal. It's refreshing." "Maybe I'm just not cut out for all that formality," Jake said with a shrug. "Sometimes it's better to just be yourself." Selena's smile grew wider, and she stepped closer to him. "I suppose so. You do seem different from the others." As they spoke, the door behind them suddenly opened, and a few members of the royal court stepped in. They were tall and regal, their faces serious as they observed the two of them. Jake couldn't help but feel a little self-conscious. Under their gaze, they didn't seem too pleased by his casual approach to diplomacy. One of the courtiers, a tall man with long, silver hair, spoke. "Princess, is this the human diplomat we are to trust with the peace talks?" he asked, his tone laced with skepticism. Selena's expression hardened, and she turned to face the courtier. "Yes, this is Jake," she said firmly, her voice carrying a sense of authority. "And I trust him." Jake gave a small bow, trying to show respect to the court, though he could feel their eyes still studying him. "It's a pleasure to be here, Your Highness," he said, his voice more serious now. "I'm here to help, however I can." The courtier gave a slight nod but didn't look convinced. "We will see," he said, before turning and leaving the room. As the others followed, Selena turned back to Jake, her face still serious but with a hint of a smile. "Don't mind them," she said softly. "They're just cautious." They don't understand humans as well as I do. Jake smiled, relieved to have her support. Well, I guess that's one thing we have in common. I don't know much about your people either, but I'm eager to learn. Selena nodded, her expression softening. I can teach you, if you're willing to learn, she said, her voice taking on a gentler tone. There's a lot about us that isn't obvious at first. I'd like that, Jake replied, his tone sincere. I think we can make this work. As the conversation continued, Jake found himself growing more and more comfortable around Selena, despite the serious nature of their meeting. There was a lightness between them that he hadn't expected. He had been nervous about meeting the princess, but now he felt as though he could truly connect with her. Maybe this peace mission wouldn't be as difficult as he had thought. By the time the meeting was over, Jake had a feeling that things were going to be different. He wasn't sure exactly how or why, but he knew that there was something about this princess, something more than just diplomacy, that had caught his attention. As he left the palace, Jake found himself smiling to himself. He hadn't expected things to go quite this way, but he was glad they had. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to this alien princess than the cold, distant figure he had imagined. The days following Jake's first meeting with Princess Selena were full of surprises. What began as an awkward encounter had turned into something much more comfortable. Selena had proven to be not only intelligent and powerful, but also unexpectedly warm and approachable, despite her royal status. Jake found himself looking forward to their meetings more and more, drawn in by the princess's unique charm. Their work began the next day. When Jake and Selena sat down to discuss the terms of the peace treaty, Selena, being the daughter of the Arendorian ruler, carried the weight of her people's expectations on her shoulders. She was determined to ensure that her people would benefit from the treaty, but she also wanted to ensure that the humans were treated fairly. Jake, on the other hand, was trying to do his best to represent the interests of Earth, a planet that was still relatively new to intergalactic diplomacy. He had no idea how they would bridge the gap between their worlds, but he was hopeful. The meetings had been going smoothly, and each time they spoke, it felt like they were getting closer to understanding each other. But there was one problem: neither of them had anticipated the rogue alien faction that opposed the peace talks. These rebels had been sabotaging diplomatic efforts for months. Believing that the Arendorians should never trust the humans, they saw Jake's presence as a threat, and they would stop at nothing to disrupt the peace process. One afternoon, as Jake and Selena were reviewing some final clauses of the treaty, alarms suddenly blared across the palace. The peaceful atmosphere vanished in an instant, replaced by the sharp sounds of emergency sirens. Selena's face hardened as she stood up quickly. "What's happening?" Jake asked, his heart racing. "Trouble," Selena replied coldly. "We've been warned that the rebels may try something today." Before Jake could ask more questions, the doors to the chamber burst open, and a group of palace guards rushed in. They were led by a tall woman with short blue hair, who saluted the princess. "Your Highness, we have confirmed a breach on the east side of the palace. The rebels are here." Selena's expression didn't change, but Jake could see the tension in her eyes. "Get ready," she said firmly. "We'll meet them head on." Jake's stomach churned with nerves, but he knew there was no turning back. The princess moved swiftly toward the control panel, issuing commands to the palace security team. It was clear she was no stranger to situations like this. Her voice was calm and commanding as she instructed the guards to reinforce the palace entrances and secure key areas. As they ran through the hallways, Jake couldn't help but admire how composed Selena was. It was as if she had done this 1,000 times before. But even she couldn't hide the underlying tension that came with defending a kingdom. Jake stayed close behind her, unsure of how much help he could really be in a situation like this, but determined to do whatever he could. When they reached the eastern courtyard, the scene was chaotic. Rebels' alien figures in dark armor were advancing toward the palace gates. Their faces were hidden, and their weapons gleamed under the twin suns. Jake could see that they were heavily armed. With blasters and energy shields, they were clearly prepared for a fight. The palace guards quickly took their positions, forming a protective line between the rebels and the inner palace. Jake stood beside Selena, still unsure of his role, but he was ready to follow her lead. "You," Selena said to Jake, her voice low but firm. "Take cover. I'll handle this." Jake nodded, ducking behind a nearby pillar as the first shots were fired. He could feel the intensity of the situation. This was no longer a diplomatic mission. This was a fight for survival. Selena stood tall, her regal presence cutting through the chaos. With a wave of her hand, a group of guards charged forward, engaging the rebels with precision and skill. Selena herself wielded a blade, a weapon forged from a rare metal found only on Arendar. She moved with grace, each step measured and powerful, as she fought off the attackers one by one. Jake watched in awe as the princess fought. She was a natural, her movements fluid and confident. It was clear that Selena wasn't just the ruler of a powerful kingdom, she was also a warrior in her own right. But Jake didn't have time to dwell on his thoughts. The sounds of the battle rang in his ears, and he knew that he couldn't just stand there and watch. He spotted one of the rebels approaching Selena, their weapon raised to strike. Without thinking, Jake sprang into action. He grabbed a blaster from a fallen guard and ran toward the enemy as the rebels swung their weapon. Jake fired the blaster, hitting the attacker square in the chest. The rebel collapsed, stunned, and Jake was left breathless. He had no training for this, but in that moment, he had done what needed to be done. Selena turned just as the rebel fell, her eyes locking with Jake's. There was no time for words, but the look she gave him was one of gratitude. Without missing a beat, she continued to fight, her blade flashing as she took on to more attackers at once. It didn't take long for the battle to shift in their favor. The palace guards were skilled, and Selena's leadership was unmatched. The rebels began to retreat, realizing they were outmatched. Within minutes, the courtyard fell silent, save for the sound of heavy breathing and the hum of weapons powering down. Jake, still clutching the blaster, looked over at Selena. She was wiping the sweat from her brow, her face a mix of exhaustion and relief, as the last of the rebels were escorted out of the courtyard. Selena finally relaxed her stance. "That was intense," Jake said, still trying to catch his breath. Selena gave a small, tired smile. "It was. But we're safe for now." Jake looked around, his heart still racing. The sight of the fallen rebels sent a chill down his spine, but he couldn't deny the adrenaline rushing through him. He had just fought beside an alien princess, and somehow it felt right. "Thanks for your help," Selena said, her voice soft but sincere. "You're not a soldier, but you fought well." Jake shrugged, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I did what I had to do, but I think you were the real hero here." Selena's smile deepened. "Perhaps, but you didn't freeze under pressure. That's something." They stood there for a moment, the weight of the battle settling in. It had been a terrifying experience, but something had changed between them. What had started as a diplomatic mission had now evolved into something more. An unexpected bond formed through danger and shared responsibility. As they walked back toward the palace, Jake couldn't help but think that this was just the beginning of a much deeper connection with the princess. He wasn't sure what lay ahead for them. Peace talks, more battles, or something entirely different, but whatever it was, he knew he wanted to be by her side. After the battle, the atmosphere around the palace had shifted. The rebels had been driven off, and peace seemed to have returned, at least for the moment. The palace guards were making their rounds, ensuring that everything was secure, while the remaining rebels were taken into custody. Jake, who still felt the rush of adrenaline in his veins, found himself walking beside Selena once again. She looked exhausted, her face still flushed from the fight, but despite her tiredness, there was a calmness in her eyes that Jake couldn't ignore. She had faced danger head-on, and now she stood as if nothing had happened. It was almost as if the battle had never taken place. "That was a bit more than I bargained for," Jake said, trying to ease the tension between them with a joke. Selena shot him a sideways glance, her lips curling into a smile. "You mean you didn't sign up for a fight?" she teased, her voice light. Jake couldn't help but chuckle. "Not exactly, but you were amazing out there. Thank you." Selena replied with a nod, though her tone had softened. But we couldn't have done it without you. You might not have been prepared, but you held your ground. Jake felt a wave of warmth spread through him. He hadn't expected to receive praise from her. He had acted on instinct, but hearing her acknowledge it made him feel like part of something bigger than just a diplomat. As they reached a quiet corner of the palace, Jake looked at her and said, I have to admit, I didn't think we'd end up fighting side by side like this. Selena laughed softly. Neither did I, she admitted. But I suppose that's the reality of leadership. You never know when things will take a turn. And sometimes, it's not just about ruling. It's about surviving. Jake nodded. He understood. That better now. He had never been in a situation quite like this. But he realized that he was no longer just an observer. He was part of something important. As they stood there, a quiet moment settled between them. It wasn't awkward or uncomfortable, but peaceful. They had just been through something intense together, and now they both needed a moment to breathe. After a few seconds of silence, Jake broke it, a playful grin on his face. Well, if you keep fighting like that, you'll have to teach me your moves. Selena raised an eyebrow, a sly smile appearing on her lips, though. And what makes you think I'd teach you? Maybe I'll need them to survive the next meeting with the royal court, Jake said, chuckling as he thought about the skeptical looks they had received earlier. From some of the courtiers, Selena's smile widened at that. Well, I suppose that's a good enough reason, she said. But you'll have to prove you're worthy of my training first. Jake laughed. I'll take that challenge. I may not be a warrior, but I can learn. Selena's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, she seemed less like a princess and more like a person. You're not as bad as you seem, she said, her voice quieter now. Jake was taken aback by her words, but he didn't let it show. He had expected her to be distant, cold even. But there was something in the way she spoke to him now, something genuine. It was like a wall had come down between them. Thanks, he replied, his voice steady. That means a lot coming from you. The two of them shared a quiet moment, standing in the hall, just outside the royal chambers. There was no urgency in the air, no pressing matter to attend to. For the first time since arriving on Arendar, Jake felt a sense of peace. But that peace was short-lived. A loud noise echoed through the hallway, breaking the calm. A guard rushed toward them, his face tense and worried. Your Highness, there's something you need to see, the guard said, his voice urgent. Selena's expression immediately turned serious. What is it? There's been a message, Princess. A message from the rebel faction's leader. It's not good, the guard replied. Jake felt a knot form in his stomach. The peaceful moment was gone in an instant. Selena, too, seemed shaken, though she quickly regained her composure. Take me to it, she said, her voice cold with determination. Jake followed them through the winding corridors of the palace, his thoughts racing. The rebels were still out there. They had been driven off. But the message could mean that more danger was coming. He glanced at Selena, who walked beside him, her expression unreadable. She had been so strong in the fight, so in control. But now, Jake could see the weight of her responsibility. When they reached the room where the message was displayed, Selena stepped forward and activated the hologram. The figure of a tall, shadowed alien appeared before them. His face was hidden, but his voice echoed through the chamber, cold and threatening. Princess Selena, the figure said, you think you have won. But this is just the beginning. The true fight is still to come. No peace will be made with humans while we still breathe. The message cut off abruptly, leaving a silence that seemed to stretch for eternity. Selena stood motionless, her hand clenched into a fist. Jake could feel the anger and frustration radiating off her, but he also saw the determination in her eyes. She wasn't going to let these rebels tear apart what they had worked so hard to build. We will not let them win, Selena said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. We will fight, and we will protect this world. Jake stepped forward, his voice steady. You're not alone in this, Selena. I'm here to help, no matter what. For a brief moment, Selena looked at him, her eyes softening. She didn't say anything, but the look she gave him spoke volumes. She knew that this fight was far from over. But in that moment, she wasn't alone. She had an ally. The tension in the room was thick. But Jake wasn't afraid. He had seen Selena fight, and now, more than ever, he knew she was someone he could trust. Together, they would face whatever came next, with determination and strength. As they left the room, the weight of the future settled on them both, but there was a flicker of hope in the air. Jake had no idea what challenges lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain: he was in this fight for the long haul. And so was Selena. The next few days after the rebels' message were filled with tension and uncertainty. Princess Selena remained calm, focused on the peace talks and securing the safety of her people. But Jake could tell she was struggling. She was more withdrawn, her mind clearly occupied with the threat of the rebels. He had never seen her this way, and it made him realize just how much responsibility she carried. Jake, for his part, was also feeling the pressure. The mission he had come on, to help form a treaty between Earth and the Arendorians, now seemed like a distant memory. Instead of making peace, they were fighting off rebels who wanted to destroy everything they had worked toward. He knew he had to stay strong for Selena, but there were moments when the weight of the situation felt too heavy to bear. Despite their shared challenges, Jake found himself thinking more and more about Selena, about how strong she was and how much she cared for her people. He had seen her fight to protect her kingdom, and now he was seeing another side of her, the side that was vulnerable, unsure, and carrying a burden no one should have to bear alone. One evening, as they sat together in the palace's strategy room, going over the latest intelligence reports, Jake couldn't help but notice how tired Selena looked. Her violet eyes were tired, and there was a faint wrinkle of worry between her brows. He knew she had been staying up late, planning their next moves, making decisions that would affect the future of her people. "Selena," Jake said softly, his voice cutting through the silence, "you've been working nonstop. Maybe it's time to take a break." Selena didn't look up at first. She was reading through the latest report, but her fingers were trembling slightly. She knew Jake was right. She had been pushing herself too hard, but there was no time for breaks. There was too much at stake. "I don't have the luxury of taking a break," she replied, her voice quieter than usual. "If I stop now, everything will fall apart." Jake sighed, standing up from the table and walking over to where Selena sat. He placed a hand on the back of her chair, looking down at her with concern. "You're only human, Selena. You can't carry this weight alone. You need to rest." Selena finally looked up at him, her eyes meeting his. There was a flicker of something in her gaze, something that Jake couldn't quite understand. It was a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something he hadn't seen in her before. She opened her mouth to say something, but then closed it again, as if unsure of how to respond. "I don't want to seem weak," Selena said after a moment, her voice soft. "I have to be strong for my people." Jake's heart softened. He had seen this side of her before, the side that didn't want to show weakness, the side that put others before herself. But he knew that Selena wasn't weak. She was stronger than anyone he had ever met, and she didn't need to carry this burden alone. "You're not weak," he said firmly, crouching down so that he was eye level with her. "If anything, you're stronger than anyone I know, but you can't do everything on your own. It's okay to lean on others. It's okay to let people help." Selena's lips parted, and for a moment, she looked as though she might say something, but then she shook her head, looking away. "I don't know how to let go of control," she admitted quietly. "I've spent my entire life being in charge, making decisions, keeping everything together. It's hard to trust anyone else with it." Jake reached out, gently lifting her chin so she had to look at him. "You don't have to do everything alone," he repeated. "You don't have to carry the weight of your people's future by yourself. You have allies now. Selena, you have me." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Selena seemed to be processing what Jake had said, as though the truth of it was something she had never really allowed herself to believe. She looked down at the table, her hands gripping the edges of the map in front of her. "I don't know if I can trust anyone like that, Selena." said quietly, her voice tinged with doubt. I don't know if I can trust you. Jake felt a pang of disappointment at her words, but he didn't let it show. Instead, he leaned forward, his expression serious but gentle. You don't have to trust me all at once, he said. But I'm here. I'm not going anywhere, and I'll prove to you that you can trust me. Selena's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but she didn't look away. For a long moment, they just stood there in silence, the weight of their unspoken words filling the space between them. Finally, Selena nodded, though her expression was still guarded. I don't know if I can let go just yet, she said, her voice barely a whisper. But I'll try. Jake smiled softly, relieved that she hadn't shut him out. That's all I ask, he said. Just try. With that, Selena finally allowed herself to lean back in her chair, though she still looked exhausted. Jake didn't push her any further. He had said what he needed to say, and he could tell she was processing it in her own way. But just knowing that she was willing to try to trust him even just a little gave him hope. As they sat together, the weight of the world outside the palace seemed a little lighter. The rebels were still out there, the threat still very real. But in that moment, Jake knew that they had something to fight for. They had each other. Thank you, Selena said quietly, breaking the silence, for being here. For not giving up on me. Jake looked at her, his heart swelling with something he couldn't quite name. I'm not going anywhere, Selena, he said firmly. I'll stand by you, no matter what. And as they sat there together, in the quiet of the room, Jake felt a new sense of resolve. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, he believed they could face it together. There was no turning back now. The days that followed were filled with both preparation and uncertainty. Jake and Selena had begun to work more closely together, side by side. In the face of the growing threat, the rebels weren't backing down, and they had only grown bolder. With their attacks, it seemed like every moment brought another challenge, another obstacle to overcome. But through it all, Selena remained strong, and Jake, though still not a soldier, stood by her side, offering whatever support he could, despite their efforts. Jake could see the toll the constant tension was taking on the princess. Her usual calm demeanor had become more fragile, and the sparkle in her violet eyes seemed dimmed. She had always been a symbol of strength, but Jake now saw the cracks in her armor, the quiet fear that lingered beneath the surface. Selena had always been someone who carried the weight of her people, her kingdom, her people's future. She didn't allow herself the luxury of weakness. She didn't have the time for self-doubt or fear. But Jake could sense it now. The fear was there, hidden behind her fierce resolve. One night, as they sat together in the strategy room, Jake watched her as she reviewed the latest intel. The weight of the situation was starting to show. Her eyes tired and her shoulders heavy, Jake hesitated before speaking. Selena, he began, his voice quiet. You can't keep going like this. She didn't look up from the screen in front of her. I don't have a choice, Jake, she said, her voice strained. There's too much at stake. I know, Jake replied softly. But you're not invincible. You can't fight this battle on your own. I don't have a choice, she repeated. But this time there was less conviction in her voice. She sounded defeated, as though she were trying to convince herself more than anyone else. Jake's heart ached at the sight. You're only human, Selena, he said gently. Even the strongest person needs a break sometimes. Selena finally looked up at him, her violet eyes tired but grateful. She stared at him for a long moment before speaking again. I don't know how to stop, she admitted. I've been carrying this burden for so long. I don't know what it's like to let go of it. Jake stepped closer, his voice firm. But kind, you don't have to carry it alone. You don't have to be everything for everyone. Her gaze softened, but there was a sadness in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. I can't afford to stop, she whispered. If I show any sign of weakness, if I don't keep this kingdom together, everything will fall apart. Jake crouched down in front of her, placing his hands on the arms of her chair. You don't have to be perfect. No one is. And you don't have to carry the weight of your people on your own. I'm here, Selena. I'm not going anywhere. The room was quiet, save for the hum of the palace's systems in the background. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Jake wasn't sure what to say next, but he knew that he had to break through the wall Selena had built around herself. He couldn't stand by and watch her wear herself down until she couldn't go on. I know you've always had to be the strong one, Jake continued softly, but it's okay to let someone else help. It's okay to trust me. It's okay to feel scared. Selena didn't say anything at first. Instead, she looked down, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of the table. Then, after a long silence, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice shaking slightly. "But if I show it, I'm afraid I'll lose everything. If I can't protect my people, then what good am I?" Jake gently lifted her chin, making her look at him. "You've already done more than anyone could ever ask of you. But you don't have to face this fight alone. You're not alone, Selena." For the first time in what felt like days, a small but genuine smile crossed Selena's face. It was brief, but it was enough to tell Jake that she was beginning to let down her guard. The princess, so strong and unyielding, had allowed herself to admit something that had been buried deep inside her, a fear that she wasn't invincible, that she was just as human as everyone else. "I don't know how to ask for help," she said softly, almost as if she were confessing a secret. "I've never had to rely on anyone before." "You don't have to do it all yourself," Jake replied, his voice steady and warm. "You've got me, and you've got your people. You're not alone. Not anymore." Selena looked at him, her eyes softening. For a moment, Jake thought she might say something else, but the moment passed, and she gave a small nod. "Thank you," she whispered. I don't know what I would do without you." Jake's heart swelled. "You'll never have to find out." As the conversation ended, the tension between them seemed to lessen, though there was still much to be done. The threat from the rebels hadn't disappeared, and the pressure of the situation was still hanging over them. But something had changed. Between them, they had reached a place of understanding. Selena had allowed herself to open up, to let Jake in, and that was more than he could have hoped for. Later that night, after they had finished discussing the next steps in their strategy, Jake found himself walking through the palace halls, his mind still racing. It wasn't just the peace talks or the rebels that occupied his thoughts, it was Selena. He had come to admire her strength, but now he was seeing the person beneath the princess. She was a woman, burdened with more responsibility than anyone should have to bear, and he couldn't help but feel drawn to her, her vulnerability, her fears, her determination. It all made her seem even more real, more human. As he walked back to his quarters, Jake found himself thinking about how far they had come. What started as a simple mission had turned into something far more complicated, but at the same time, more meaningful. He had come here to help Selena and her people, but he had never imagined that he would end up being so deeply involved in her fight. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and the road ahead was far from easy. But Jake knew one thing for sure: he was in this, for better or for worse. He wasn't going anywhere, and neither was Selena. The following weeks passed in a blur of strategy meetings, tense negotiations, and the constant threat of the rebels. Each day, Jake found himself growing closer to Selena, not just as a diplomat, but as someone who had come to care for her deeply. He had been by her side through many challenges, and while the mission was still far from over, he knew that they were making progress. They had grown stronger together, even as the world around them seemed to grow more uncertain. It wasn't just the political situation that weighed heavily on Jake's mind. It was the growing feelings he had for the princess. He knew she was a leader, burdened with responsibility, but he had come to see her as so much more than that. She was a person with fears, hopes, and dreams, just like him, and in the quiet moments they shared, when the weight of the world wasn't pressing down on them, he could see the person she truly was. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings, Selena walked with Jake through the palace gardens. The twin suns had set, leaving the sky's soft shade of purple, and the stars above sparkled like diamonds. The garden was peaceful, the air cool and crisp, and for the first time in what felt like forever. They had a moment to themselves. It's hard to believe how much has changed since you first arrived, Selena said softly, her voice carrying. In the quiet night, when you first got here, I was so focused on the mission, so determined to protect my people that I didn't even consider what would happen next. I was just trying to survive. Jake nodded, his hands stuffed into his pockets. I get that. I think we both were just trying to get through the day. But now, things feel different. We're not just surviving. We're building something. Selena looked at him, her violet eyes softening. I never thought I'd hear those words from you. When we first met, I thought you were just another diplomat, another person sent here to make deals and go back to your world. But you're not just that. You've become more than that to me, Jake. Jake felt his heart race at her words. He had never expected this, never thought that they would come this far. He had always respected Selena, admired her strength, but now he realized how much more there was between them. They had shared so many moments together, from the intensity of battle to the quiet times where they just talked and laughed. And now, as they walked through the garden, something shifted between them. He couldn't ignore the growing feelings he had for her. Selena, Jake began, his voice steady but full of emotion. I've never been one to hold back. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that I'm here for you, not just as a diplomat, but as someone who cares. Selena stopped walking and turned to face him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, with emotions that neither of them had fully acknowledged until now. Jake could feel the weight of her gaze, and it made his heart beat faster. I care too, Jake, Selena said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want to admit it, but I do. You've become someone I trust more than I ever thought possible, but I'm scared. Jake took a step closer to her, his eyes meeting hers. Scared of what? Scared of what happens after all of this, Selena replied, her voice trembling slightly. What happens if we succeed? What happens if we fail? What happens if I allow myself to care about you when I have so much else to worry about? Jake reached out, gently placing his hand on hers. We don't have to have all the answers right now, he said softly. We just have to take things one step at a time. We've been through so much already, and we're still standing. Whatever happens next, we'll face it together. Selena's eyes softened, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to smile. I don't know how you do it, Jake, she said, her voice filled with a mix of admiration and warmth. You make it sound so easy. But maybe it is that simple. Jake smiled back, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. It doesn't have to be complicated. We're both in this. For better or for worse, we'll figure it out together. They stood there for a moment, simply holding hands, both of them lost in the quiet beauty of the garden. The weight of their responsibilities still hung over them, but in that moment, they were just two people finding comfort in each other's presence. Suddenly, the quiet of the garden was interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. A guard appeared in the distance, walking quickly toward them. He stopped a few feet away, his expression serious. Your Highness, the guard said, bowing slightly. We have received word of another attack. The rebels are making their move. It's time. Selena's face hardened, and Jake could see the shift in her demeanor. The moment of peace they had shared was over, replaced by the cold reality of their situation. Selena squeezed Jake's hand once before releasing it. Standing tall and composed once more, we'll face this together, Jake said, his voice steady. We've been through worse. Selena nodded, her eyes meeting his with a sense of resolve. Yes, we have, and we will again. As they walked back toward the palace, ready to face the new challenge, Jake couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose. The road ahead was uncertain, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't alone. And neither was Selena. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The future was still unclear, filled with both hope and fear. But in that moment, as they prepared for the battle ahead, Jake and Selena knew that they had something more important than ever: each other.